Jesus once said, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." What does that look like? Meet a family who followed God's call to the Middle East, a journey filled with great challenges and great rewards.
Hello and welcome to another episode of To the Ends of the Earth, a CMML podcast. I'm Aaron Fullen.
And I am Joel Hernandez. We are very pleased to be with you today. We have a couple of special guests who have called the Middle East their home for more than 2 decades. Jerry and Sarah Mattix first arrived in Turkey in 2001, and they have raised their 3 children there. Today they live in northern Cyprus, where they serve in several ministries, focusing on making disciples across the Middle East. CMML has served them since 2001, and they're commended by Tieton Drive Bible Chapel in Yakima, Washington. Jerry and Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's a joy to be with you.
So glad you're here. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us the story of how God led you to the Middle East. And I know that's a broad question, but that's intentional. We want to hear the full scope of it.
Well, I think you could say in a way it was fated, though we don't believe in fate. My parents are missionaries and her parents are missionaries. And in a way, it's more natural for us to live outside of the U.S. The U.S. is a foreign country to us. And so coming to the U.S. for college, the first thing we wanted to do was get out of here and get back out to the mission field. That's what's always been in our spiritual DNA. I think a testimony, first and foremost, to both our parents. Did such a great job of including us in the ministry, and not seeing us as an addendum or a nuisance, but as part of their work and allowing us to love missions and enjoy it.
That's wonderful.
So that when we came to our senses as teenagers and started to follow the Lord, the first thing we wanted to do was be like our parents and get out and do what they did, because they seemed to be having so much fun doing it.
Yeah.
At least that's what I could say. I think my wife could agree in that count.
No, definitely. I mean, I am so grateful for the years I had in Mexico. It shaped me, it transformed me, and my mom and dad made it so clear from the very beginning that you are not just our children. You are a part of what we are doing here. And they included us in every aspect of their ministry. And because of that, I learned to love the people around me. And I think that really sowed seeds into my heart from a very young age.
That's great.
So both of us came to the Lord early, and then caught on fire in our teenage years, and then showed up at Emmaus. And the next thing I know, this pretty blonde gal with a great tan is tapping me on the shoulder in registration line at Emmaus Bible College, and says, "¿Tú hablas español?"
What?
And I was like, what? She speaks Spanish. That's even better,
Oh, my.
Well, she wasn't hitting on me, not yet. But as it turns out, we became great friends. And that was the Spanish connection. And the fact that we were both MKs. At that time, Emmaus had a lot of missionary kids like ourselves, third culture kids. And we hung out, did a lot of great things together. And it was there at Emmaus that we caught the bug for the Middle East. I think both of us initially were very interested in missions and naturally thinking of South America. In many ways, I personally learned Spanish before I learned English, right? So it was natural to think about going back there and serving. And yet, for the first time there at Emmaus, sitting under the tutelage of Ken Fleming, we began to, and for some reason that year especially, he was harping on the Kurds being the largest unreached people group in the whole world. And that just kept coming across our path, and the whole Muslim world was fascinating, exotic, thrilling, all at once. All of a sudden exposed to the 1040 window, all these countries and peoples that have not been reached with the gospel all across Central Asia and so forth. And that really arrested my attention, and I hit the library. I'm like, I had to learn about these things.
Wow.
Interestingly, it was another young MK that had just come back from Morocco. doing a short-term trip. You might recognize her name, Melanie Papworth. Now it's Melanie Mead. And she had just come back and had these fascinating stories and pictures of these people that she had interacted with, and that was just incredibly interesting.
Wow.
And so both of us kind of caught this independent of one another. And so as we're going through our studies, this is what's kind of percolating in us the whole time. You probably remember that.
Well, I mean, Mr. Fleming just constantly was 1040 window, 1040 window. And so I began poring over books, and the books I was poring over were specifically focusing on the Kurdish people. And so I just had an incredible heart for the Kurdish people. It just was growing and growing. And they're Muslims, but a very much unreached people group. And so this really touched my heart, and I shared it with him, but I was a little bit cautious because I found that we both had similar vision. We were just friends at the time.
She wanted to make sure it didn't come across as if she was setting herself up.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
I think the Lord was involved in that setup. But as it turned out, and here's a good example of why you should do your homework and do it well. Ken Fleming had us write a paper on the history of missions. I wanted to do Morocco, because Melanie had come from Morocco, and I was fascinated with the Berbers and all that was happening in the Eastern Front. So he said, no, don't do that. He says, do Turkey. I says, why would I do Turkey? He says, well, you can't get any information about Morocco. The Muslim world, where do you read about missions in that country? I had to do an assignment on the history of missions in the country. And so, but I've got friends, he said, in Turkey, and I can hook you up. So I said, okay. So he hooked me up with some of the greatest people, that I've ever met, now mentors of mine. And this was Roger Malstead, who was one of the fathers of missions work in Turkey, went in 1960. And then George Bristow, Eric Weger, some great people. Of course, back then, email was still really new and fancy, We were communicating as best we could and writing this paper on Turkey. At the very end, I come to the conclusion of this is a country that's a Muslim country, at the same time a secular democratic country, wide open to the gospel, and yet one of the least reached in the Middle East. Someone's got to go, and then I kind of looked at myself and thought, who am I talking to here, And the Lord used my assignment to convict me that maybe I should be thinking about this seriously.
Wow. So you got married shortly after college, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And then moved immediately or not immediately?
Well, it wasn't that quick.
Okay.
Maybe you can explain.
No, we moved to Yakima at that point.
Okay.
And we settled in the assembly there. And he was working a very long-hour job. He was doing landscaping. And I was doing a lot of different things. And our whole purpose was to end up in Turkey.
Okay.
But I wanted to back up a little bit. Like, when we started liking each other, that was one of his criterias. He said, he told the Lord that my wife needs to want to go to Turkey.
Wow.
Now, I knew I wanted to go reach the Kurdish people, and the southeastern area of Turkey is Kurdish. And yet I was a little bit shy to tell him that, because I knew that if he found out that I really was convicted by the Lord about that, I was a little nervous that he would realize that maybe I was the one for him. So this was a little bit. And then Ken Fleming was the one that said to Jerry, why are you waiting so long? This is the girl for you. And so he was the one, because Jerry was a little bit
Ken.
more, he's like, oh,
He's to blame for everything good that happened in our life.
I got to say about Ken, he was my teacher as well. And he had been a missionary in South Africa for 25 years before he came to Emmaus. And when he came to Emmaus, he took over the missions department and was so influential in generations of students to catch a vision for missions and go out and serve the Lord. Many, many people would attribute their missions passion and fervor and commitment to Ken Fleming, who recently passed away, and we remember him and his influence.
Oh,
fondly.
yes.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
he continued to write us and support us and pray for us in all through those years.
Wow.
He just never let go of us, to his
great.
credit. But one important element that happened in there, I had begun to write these missionaries, wrote this paper, kind of caught the fire, and we're talking about this all the time. And then I thought, well, I need to, think about the next steps. I went back to our home church in Yakima, Tieton Dry Bible Chapel, and I talked to my elders. I said, this is beginning to kind of go a different direction from South America, what I imagined. What could we, what are the steps I need to start taking? So I was still 19 years old, but they began to guide me from then on. And one of the things that they thought would be important was for me to actually go and visit Turkey and see it with my own eyes, which I did as a 19-year-old. Ironically, my dad was 18 or 19 when he went to Bolivia for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Back in 1967, I think. Wow. And so here I am, following in the same
History
footsteps of my
repeating
father,
itself.
going the other direction
Yeah.
to Istanbul. And there was no internet much back then in Istanbul. And I'm thinking, I've never met George Bristow. I don't even have a picture of the guy. How am I going to find him, right? But there he was waiting for me in Istanbul at the Turk airport. And he took me around the country for a whole month. And again, this was reverberating in my heart. But then the question was, how do you come to a country like this? There's a lot of challenges in terms of language, in terms of visas and other things like that. But the Lord just continued to guide and open those doors moving forward. And as you said, by the time we got married, 3 days after graduating from Emmaus in the Marble Chapel.
Why wait, right?
Right. Her father said, you have to wait till she graduates. So according to his
You
dictum,
met the criteria.
we did. And everybody knew, in fact, it was the joke at our wedding, these people are going to Turkey, right? And so that was set in stone from the very beginning. And so our elders knew this. They just kept pulling the handbrake, right? And say, okay, just wait another year. Let's see this through a bit, get used to marriage. But we just didn't buy anything in the U.S. We saved all our wedding money, and for our first year anniversary, we took a flight, this time with the blessing of our elders, to Turkey, so she could see it, right? She hadn't laid eyes on it yet.
Yeah.
And this was fascinating because we arrived in Turkey, and Eric Wieger at this point was guiding us around, and it was bleak winter. We took a 24-hour bus ride to the eastern part of the country, which is what was, our heart was burning for the Kurdish people. And we get out there, and I'm rearing to go. And I say one day to my wife, I say, sweetheart, now what if the Lord opens the door and it's now, we have to come now. What did you think about that? Remember that?
I do. It was a bit of a shock at that time. And I remember saying to him, well, the Lord would have to do a really big work in my heart for me to be convinced that it's going to be sooner than later. And God did exactly that.
Wow.
I still remember the time where I was sitting in this little apartment. It was Ramadan, mind you. So it was muddy, it was dark, and everyone's fasting and grumpy. And I sat there in this very overheated room because the heating system was always too hot, and really began to pray. And the work of the Holy Spirit and just how God worked in my heart in an incredible way. And I was convicted that I needed to come to this place that was not a beautiful city. Yeah. It was muddy. It was dirty. The people were all grumpy at that time, obviously, because they were fasting. And yet I felt the Lord really nudge me and say to me, this is your home, Sarah. And I remember leaving, and I still have that scene in my mind. I was leaving Diyarbakır on this bus. We were going to go all the way across the country. That was a 24-hour bus ride, mind you. And as we're leaving the city, I'm looking out the window, and rocks. It's just dirt and rocks, nothing beautiful. Not the beauty that we have around us here.
Yeah.
And just rocks and dirt. And yet I loved that place. And I know that was God, because why would I love such a place? But God put it on my heart at that
I
moment.
remember looking over in the bus ride, and I see she's crying. And I says, why are you crying? Was everything okay? And she said, the Lord did that miracle. we need to come. I was speechless. I thought, I was silently praying the whole time, because I'm feeling the tug.
Yeah.
But I was not going to go without my wife being fully on board. And that was an important criteria for us, that it wasn't, I'm the missionary, she's my helper.
Yeah.
We're together missionaries. We're one body, and we're doing this together.
And
so
the Lord led you together.
To see her there, just now, she admitted this is a time the Lord had put. And so we came back to our elders, and we say to them, mind you, we're early 20s, and but this has been 5 years in the making.
Yeah.
So we sit down with the elders. They say, how did it go? We said, well, we feel like we need to go. So, okay, that's great. How many years? No, this summer. We're talking about 7 months later. They're picking their jaws up from the ground.
They're
Going,
shocked.
okay, why do you feel that? Well, there's an opportunity to study at the university. We can get a visa, and there's an older couple, Eric and Diane Uyghur, that have agreed to mentor us. And there's a local church in Diyarbakır that has agreed to have us work with them. Just everything is lined up. And so the elder said, okay, well, we're gonna pray about this. And so I'd been studying Acts 13, where you have Paul and Barnabas really feel the tug of the Spirit to go, but the rest of the elders don't seem, convinced at all. And they put it to prayer and fasting, and it's the Holy Spirit who intervenes and says, okay, send them along to the work that I've called them. And so we were committed. We had 5 elders too. We said, we want all 5 of them to sign off. We know they're going to be naysayers. That's to be expected, but we want our 5 elders to be on board. And so a couple weeks later, we sit down with our elders, and each one of them go down the line and says, we know you guys, we've been praying with you guys for this for a while now, and we think it's of the Lord. And it comes down to the last elder, okay, Dave St. Lawrence. And Dave says, I've always thought you guys were crazy, and this just proves it. This is insanity. Where do you guys think you're going? The Middle East is halfway around the world. You guys are young. It's dangerous. And he starts listing all these things.
Oh, my.
And then he stops. Then he says, but I just can't shake it. The Holy Spirit keeps telling me you need to go.
Oh.
And that settled it for us. We knew this was of the Lord. And it was so critical, because there's been so many times between that moment 26 years ago and where we stand today that we've had every reason to second guess our decision to move to the Middle East. But knowing all along that the Lord had confirmed it in so many ways, beginning with our elders and in many other ways, that was critical.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hello, listeners. All over the world, missionaries like Sarah and Jerry are facing enormous challenges and opportunities for the sake of the gospel. How can you make a difference? The answer is prayer. By praying for missionaries, you become part of the movement. The team effort of missionaries, supporters, local churches, and organizations that together are advancing the spread of the gospel globally. Missions is CMML's award-winning magazine. Read by thousands of subscribers, published 11 times a year, it includes mission stories, reports, and articles that are designed to encourage your participation in missions through prayer. Missions Magazine keeps you informed about the worldwide outreach of Assembly Missions and encourages effective prayer for the needs of the Lord's servants. It engages readers in missionary projects and opportunities as well. And best of all, U.S. and Canadian residents can receive Missions free of charge. To start your free subscription to Missions, go to cmml.us/podcast and tap on Missions Magazine.
Okay, so you go to Turkey. Let's fast forward to that point. Specifically Western missionaries are sometimes accused of kind of doing their own thing, their own agenda, their own ideas, their own vision for, without taking into account the local context.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah.
I'll explain.
Okay. So how do you avoid that? Or when you arrived, what was your approach to ministry there?
Going into the mission field, we had been at Emmaus, and it's all about church planting, and we want to get out there and start planting churches in new places. And we came to the elders of this church in Diyarbakır where we were going to work with them. And we said, we want to start a church in this town nearby called Batman. That sounds great. That makes great prayer letters, right? I work in Batman. But they said to me, well, I don't know if that's such a great idea, But they were gracious. So you go and check it out. So we went down to Batman, an hour and a half bus ride away, and realized it was a hotbed of Hezbollah. And it was dark, no church, no Christians. And we came back, and they said, it would be good if maybe you stayed here a bit and we could work together. And we thought, well, that sounds wise. And Eric chimed in and said, yeah, you guys should work together with them a little longer. And by God's grace and their humble, way of approaching this, we ended up staying in Diyarbakır, working under the local leaders and being mentored by local elders.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Such a joy. We've learned so much. I mean, of course, you learn at Emmaus, or any institution in the West, but it's nothing like being mentored by local leaders on the mission field. And we were young. And so we realized that coming in, we were the typical Western mentality. We've got to come and start churches, and they obviously don't know what they're doing, so we've got to do it better. And since then, we've had so many other individuals, couples, and organizations come to the church in Diyarbakır. Now, I'm a part of this church by now, right? And they would say, like, well, can we get, your vision, and can we hear you out? We want to work with you. And then go off and do their own thing anyways. In fact, a couple came expressly to start a church in Batman, a Baptist couple, two couples. And they said, we want to start a church in Batman. I said, well, that's great. We want to as well. It's just down the road, but let's work on this together. Let's do this as a local church, and when it's ready, we can launch you out there. And that's a great idea. But then they went and did their own thing anyways, and they lasted, I think, 2.5 years.
Wow.
And we've seen that pattern over and over again. When us as Westerners essentially think we know better, and figure the local people must not know what they're doing, and so we're just going to go and do our own thing anyways.
Yeah.
Whereas there's so much wisdom to be gained from them if we're willing to just sit tight and work with them as opposed to outside of them on our own terms.
Right.
That must have given you a whole tremendous amount of local insight and the values and the passion and what God, the whole context of what God had been doing there before you arrived, and for you to catch that and make it part of your DNA would have been so important.
It served as a shield for us, because we're dealing in a part of the country when the church is being attacked and Westerners are targets, and there would be times when the police would be in the church and maybe questioning me, and the local elders would get in between and say, I'll deal with this. And so they were shielding us so much of the time from unhealthy attention, giving us wisdom, insight in terms of how to deal with certain scenarios. And I can tell you so many ways in which they've just saved me time and again from great harm and shame. But overall, they become just our greatest friends, and comrades. And it's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And that's, the biblical approach is the older teaching the younger, and the wisdom that transfers when you do it that way, because young people a lot of times have the fervor and the passion and the energy that needs to be shaped by the wisdom and experience. And in this case, the cultural context, to make you much more effective than you could be just
And
plowing
to their
ahead.
credit, they were willing to bring us along and allow us to serve with them and to channel our youthful energy. And Sarah began to establish a children's program, and we did youth work together. And then we're doing camps and, doing all the discipleship program, but as part and parcel with the local church under their leadership, and blessed by them. And so this was a beautiful example of working together as opposed to each doing their own thing.
Yes.
And I think one of the, it also, as I said, it protected us from much harm, many mistakes in the long run. But it taught us something important. And that's that at the end of the day, if we're wanting to establish something that's going to be long lasting, it needs to be in and through the local church, because little did we know, a few years later, we were going to be kicked out, deported. And thankfully, all our eggs were not in our own basket.
Yeah.
It was in the local church's hands.
Right.
And they continue to reap the benefits of that, as we have as well from that partnership.
So for our listeners who may not understand the cultural context of living among the Kurdish people, how is it different in your approach to ministering to the Kurdish people than it would be, for example, to Americans or any Western civilization? What are some of the key elements of how to connect?
You can speak to that if you like.
Sure. So, it's all about relationship. And we can see this even in Jesus when he is spending time with his disciples. He's very intentional about connecting with people. And I think in the Middle East, it's still the same way. it's all about relationship. It's not about a beautiful program. It's not about an event. It's not about everything being orchestrated perfectly. It's about being intentional and being present with each and every person you're sitting with. And so if that means sitting all hours till all hours of the night, drinking tea, which we did a lot of, then so be it, because they are being honored by our presence in their home, and we are honoring them by having them in our home. And so much of what we were doing was sitting with people. Wow. And that meant night after night, really, till midnight at times with kids in tow, because that was what the culture was, and that is what friendship was to them, and that is what gained their trust, because obviously we're Christians and they are Muslims, and so there's that aspect. And then even with the church community, as people came to Christ, so many of them were rejected by their family, and so many of them lost their parents in terms of the respect, and so we became that for them. And so having them in our home constantly meant every Sunday, we had probably close to 25 to 30 youth in our house from 1 p.m. until 11 at night. And that is what it was. We were attempting to be family to these young people, opening our home, having our home always open. Now, that is hard when you think about it in Western mentality, right?
Yes.
Boundaries, personal space,
Right.
all these things that we learn about. But that was what we learned as we served there. So again, just being present with people, seeing people, showing them value, dignity by, and much through hospitality and the good conversations that you're having around food and tea.
Yeah, and that requires giving of yourself. Like that is such an important element, even regardless of where you're at in the world. It takes a selfless posture to be able to say, you know what, I would love to go to bed by 9:30, but there's people still here and great conversations happening, and the spirit is definitely in this. So let's get less sleep, and
It meant kind of altering our schedule and embracing this.
Yeah.
And say, I'm a morning person. I love to get up at 6 a.m., but that wasn't happening in Turkey.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm up till 12 p.m. every night, right? So just altering and recognizing if this is really what our life is about. I want to be about people
Yes.
and engaging them. And it also meant kind of reformatting our understanding of time and relationship. So often, we have a checklist, and I have a lot of things I want to do in a day, and I kept getting interrupted by people wanting to stop me to drink tea, and at the beginning I felt like it's such a waste of time, So
Interruptions.
and this would happen all the time. I remember when I arrived in Diyarbakır, there's no Walmart around, and so I need a nut and a bolt. Simple, so I should be able to go to store and find this. So I asked the local guys, where did I find? Well, there's a store down the road here. So I go down and I ask the guy, and he shuffles through his shelves and boxes, and he can't locate it. And then I said, okay, that's a shame. I'll have to go to the next store. He said, well, why don't you sit and have tea? Well, no, I have to get this nut and this bolt, and well, you just sit and have some tea. And so I'd sit and have some tea. We'd talk for half an hour. He'd ask me about my life, and I'd get the whole story and talk. And then I'm eager to get up and go and get my job done, right? So I'd say, well, where can I find this? Well, if you go down the road and turn left and right and ask for Ahmet, and then tell them that me, Mehmet, has sent him your greetings, and he'll take care of you. So I'd, go down, locate the next shop, and I'm looking for this nut and bolt. And he'd say, wow, let me shuffle around. So he's looking through his thing, the same rigmarole.
Same thing.
And then can't find it. He's like, have some tea. No, I really don't want to have any tea. I want to
Mind
get
you,
going.
It's the middle of summer.
And this is summer. They always drink tea, more tea in the summer.
Hot tea.
Hot tea. And so, I remember this happening one particular day, looking for this nut and bolt like 15 times. By the time I'm drinking my, 15th, 20th cup of tea, I'm bursting, right? Looking for the bathroom now, not for the nut and the bolt. And I'm so frustrated, and I'm getting home, and I'm thinking, sweetheart, I feel like such a failure. We came to the Middle East to serve these people, and I can't find a nut and a bolt. I just can't get our home set up. Yeah. And how are we ever going to reach this people? And then the Spirit nudges me and says, well, I set up 15 appointments for you today. You had an opportunity to talk to 15 people about your life, about why you're here. Isn't that why you came to the Middle East? I thought, wow, that was divine rebuke right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would God ever give us more than we need? Most of us have prayed, Lord, please provide for this need. But have you ever stopped to ask why God sometimes provides more than we need? I was privileged to learn the answer by watching my parents. Tom and Sandy Peaslin both grew up in Christian homes, making professions of faith at a young age. But it wasn't until 1983, while living near Oklahoma City, that they truly came to know the Lord Jesus as their Savior. God used the testimony of other young Christian couples and a series of gospel meetings preached by a brother from Vancouver to open their eyes to the gospel. Once saved, the Lord began a work of maturing in their lives. He surrounded them with faithful believers who discipled them and helped them grow. My grandparents, John and Mary Faulkner, faithfully invested in them. Later, after moving to California, God used Gene Gibson, Bill McDonald, and many others through the Discipleship Intern Training Program and the local assembly there. Then, after sending our family as missionaries to Gómez Palacio, Mexico, He gave them another wonderful example through Bob and Marjorie Klingon. Looking back, it's clear that God wasn't just preparing missionaries, He was shaping hearts. Before moving to Mexico, my dad had been successful in business and we had enjoyed a comfortable life. God had to show them the emptiness of living for material things and begin to look to Him alone for their daily needs. He kindly accomplished this, not by simply taking things away, but by changing their hearts. He replaced a love for material things with a greater love for Himself and for people. To quote my dad, "Since living in Mexico, the Lord has always supplied more than we need, sometimes much more." Then comes the lesson. When that happens, we don't simply assume it's for us. We ask, "Lord, this isn't for us, it's for somebody else. Who is it for? Please show us so we can pass it on." That is the heart of biblical stewardship, being conduits of God's grace. Philippians 4:19, "And my God shall supply all your need according to His riches in glory by Christ Jesus." As you know, the question is never whether He will provide, but how might He choose to do so, and how might He use me to provide for the life of someone else? May we be found faithful in prayer, generous in giving, and ready to serve in His mission wherever He sends.
So your time in Turkey was not without challenges.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what you faced and endured during your time there?
Well, there are any number of different challenges. Probably the first one, just having children there. I mean, my wife could speak to that and raising kids.
Well, the hospitals are not as advanced, and therefore it was difficult. And also, as a foreign woman in the Middle Eastern culture, especially a foreign woman that's very foreign looking in comparison to the women that were around me, it was always having to be careful not to look at men, keeping my eyes down, going to stores, keeping my eyes down, walking on the street, having men constantly invite me into their cars because I was a foreign woman. So this was what I dealt with on a daily basis. And I also dealt with several situations that I was sexually harassed because I was a foreign woman. And this was what I dealt with very regularly just because of the context that we were living in. So that was really hard. Also having our kids, it wasn't safe per se to have them just playing on the streets or allowing them to go anywhere alone because, again, it wasn't safe. And this was a time in Diyarbakır that there was a lot of protests. So we would have many times where there would be protests outside our house. It was political protests having to do with the Kurdish people, and we would have pepper spray and all the smoke flooding our house, and then I'd be hiding in the bathroom with the kids.
She'd call me, so what do I do? There's
our eyes are
pepper
watering.
Spray everywhere.
It was there were some really hard times in that sense. I think as a woman looking back, that was really hard for me. I felt like eyes were always on me, and as my daughters were growing up, I was quite nervous for them. And my daughter, right before we ended up leaving Turkey, had some very scary experiences with men trying to pursue her and trying to do some things to her. And so I think that in itself was a real difficult aspect of that
and we
culture.
learned through this, of course, to exercise the wisdom of Christ. Remember the incident in which we had started, Sarah had helped organize a children's program in the church, and a lot of gypsy kids in that neighborhood. It's an old part of the city of Diyarbakır. There's still walls standing out there, historical buildings. The church across the street is 3,000 year old, 300 AD, so 1,700 years old. So lots of history. And so we had this kids program, and Sarah was just, getting permissions from the parents. The kids would have to go home and sign this paper from their mom and dad to know that they could attend this Christian program. And this man walks in, just ferocious, angry, and he starts yelling, you guys are brainwashing our children. This is a Muslim neighborhood. You have no right to be selling snails here. That's like an expression in Turkish. You don't sell snails in a Muslim neighborhood. I don't know when they did that, but at any rate, he's angry. He's grabbing children. He's throwing them on the ground. And my wife is sitting there, and my 2 or 3 year old daughter, Ishael, is next to her. She bursts out into tears, and he leans over and leans into my wife with his fists raised. Now, in a Middle Eastern culture, in a shame honor culture, I, as a husband, have a right, a duty at that moment to go in there and beat the daylights out of this man. That's what I have to do. The culture demands that of a husband. You don't go in and attack another man's wife like that. That's my honor, right? And so he's besmirching my honor. So at that moment, I come in and I'm thinking, okay, turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek. How do I do that? So I get between her and this man, and he's got his fists raised. He wants to fight me, and I look around, and our young people have gathered. One of them's got a baseball bat. The other one's got a piece of iron, and they're ready to go. All I need to do is throw the first punch.
Right.
And this guy's toast. Right. But he's sitting there. He's got in position to box and to fight with me. And I got my hands down. And I'm thinking, no. And the Holy Spirit literally took over. And I just continued to explain to him what we were doing was not illegal, and that he had no right to come in and hurt the kids and assault my wife, and that, but he's like, let's fight. No, we're not doing that, and I'm going to come, but you can complain. It's not a problem. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to have, a big fight here in the church. And this lasted, the standoff, about 10 minutes. It seemed like an eternity.
Yeah.
And finally, he starts walking out, and he's threatening us. He says, every kid that comes out of here, I'm going to slit their throats. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to bomb this church. And he's going on. These are real threats in the Middle East.
Wow.
And at the end, he walks out the front door. Of course, everybody, my wife and our children, they're in tears, and everybody's traumatized. And the guys are like, why didn't you attack him? You should have let us, take him out. And I said, you imagine what the newspaper would write the next day? Man comes to church, gets beat up, and worse, what would really happen is he would go and collect his friends and would attack the church and would raise the church. But as it turned out, as frightening as an experience as that was, we never saw that man again. The wisdom of Jesus to turn the other cheek is what it does, is that it shames the other person. And in a shame honor culture, that is your greatest weapon. He was ashamed because he came to attack us and to get a reaction from me. And because we didn't respond in like manner, he had to leave. And that was the end of that. So there were some frightening scenarios like that we had to deal with. Wow.
And you knew some missionaries in Turkey that had lost their lives for their faith, correct?
Yeah. We did, and they were dear friends. They lived a couple hours northwest from us in a city called Malatya. We did combined youth events and camps, and I remember we were doing a filming like this with our local pastor Ahmed and a few others, and we saw the news that these Christians, evangelical Christians, have been killed in Malatya. And we quickly looked through it and we recognized them to be our friends. And so we got in the van and just drove straight up there. And by the time we got there, it was becoming clear what had happened is that these 3 men had been brutally killed by 5 young radicalized Muslim Turks. And what it amounted to is that one of them, a Turkish gentleman, the Turkish pastor, was working in a Christian publishing company called Zirve. And there was a German brother that was sharing the office with him. He was involved in a Turkish Bible translation. And then he had a Kurdish assistant. So you have a Turk, a Kurd, and a German, all working in this office. And then 2 of them are married, have children. And one young man that had been coming to the fellowship, pretending to be interested, asked if he could bring some of his friends, talk with him. Well, of course, come on in, he says. So Nejati, the Turkish pastor, welcomes them to his office. They're sitting down, and they begin to berate Christianity. And Nejati was an angel. I mean, he was just so calm. In fact, he formerly was very strict Muslim. He had memorized the Quran. Wow. And had turned to Christ, and they knew that, and they were deeply offended that someone of his caliber had abandoned Islam. And so they began to, really yell at him and demand that he go back to Islam. And then they all stood up and pulled knives and guns. They'd come prepared. And Nejati literally gave his life as a lamb. I mean, he would not renounce his faith. And of course, Tilman, the German brother, was in the room next door, and they grabbed him, they hog-tied him as well, and they put him both on the ground. And the third, their assistant, showed up at the door, and they grabbed him as well, and they tortured them. And about that time, the police was onto this, and the police were at the door, and so they just slit their throats. And it was horrific, for the wives, for the children, traumatizing. It was frightening for us. You say you count the cost. We went there knowing full well this is parcel of what we might face one day. But when you see it happen, coming home, I think a day or so after that, we sit down and have a serious conversation. Obviously, this is not just a possibility. Now, this is a reality.
Yes.
You remember?
Yeah, and I remember having to really, again, surrender my husband to the Lord at that point, because it came out later that it was not just going to be Malatya, that there was a larger plan to also attack Diyarbakır Kilisesi, Diyarbakır Church, where Jerry was serving, where we were serving. And so knowing that there had been a target on his back, and we had to go back to, Lord, you brought us here. We are going to continue to trust you in this very hard time. And it was really a turning point again for me to go back to the Lord and say, my husband is not mine. He's yours. He's your son. And I surrender him to you. And that was not the only time I had to do that. I mean, there were other situations, but it was like again and again, I have to go back to, I surrender him to you. And so it was a really hard time for our family. Yeah, it was just so much grief, and grief in the Turkish church, because they were our personal friends. We were sad for the widows and the children that were left behind. Yeah.
It was not easy. And what was there was so much in that experience that was character shaping for us, burying those men. One of them, Tilman, the German brother, his wife, an incredibly courageous woman named Suzanne Geske, insisted that he be buried in Malatya. Well, the governor didn't want this Christian martyr buried in the city, but the Christians went up and found an Armenian cemetery and began to dig a grave for him. And I was tasked with Pastor Ahmed to go find Tilman in the morgue. And they didn't want us there, but we went in and we had to, find his body and escort it out of there and take it to the gravesite. And just, that whole experience, it was surreal, because it's not just the grief of burying a friend and the tragedy and all that, but you are surrounded by Turkish media. They are filming everything that's going on. Now you've got a target on your back, right? And are you willing to get up there and stand by the grave of a fellow Christian martyr, put him in the ground honor him and his family, knowing you could be next, that there could be snipers around. And yet it was a polarizing moment for the church. Many did flee and leave, and it was really a pruning experience for the church. For those that remained, grew so much stronger in their faith because of that. And one of the really God moments of that whole situation was a couple of days after their death, maybe the second night of, the news reporters crowded into the house of Susan Geske, the German widow, and said, well, can you say something? These men have killed your husband. What do you have to say? And she said, just very calmly and serenely, says, Jesus taught us to forgive. And I forgive those men who killed my husband. And that sent shockwaves through Turkey. So you don't do that in Islam. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You exert revenge, you exert your pound of flesh. And yet she was forgiving them.
What powerful
And
testimony.
there have been probably more people saved because of her testimony and their martyrdom than could have been saved in their lifetime through their ministry. It's remarkable what the Lord did through that experience.
Wow. Persecution was promised to us by Christ himself. They hate me, they're going to hate you. And just know that when you experience that, it's for me. It's because of my name that you bear. I would say many listening probably to this podcast, hearing stories like that is very unnerving, uncomfortable, frightening, and makes all of us ask, are we willing? Similar to what you were saying, Sarah. Are we willing to say, yes, Lord, whatever? Whatever you would have for me, help me to endure it and to do it for your glory. So what would you, in our last few minutes together, thankfully we have another episode with the Mattixes, which we will talk about their experiences in northern Cyprus. But as we wrap this episode, what would you say to Christians, fellow Christians, who are thinking about what you just talked about, and they're wondering, how do you be a blessing? How do you share the gospel in the midst of strong opposition?
I'll share an interesting incident, what happened around that time. Bill Drake from OM, who sings songs for them and is well known, a promoter of OM, had organized a concert in Diyarbakır, must have been a couple months after this happened. And he asked me to help organize this, and we were still grieving.
Wow.
And some of the songs that he sang were just so powerful, so touching. I still remember them. And ironically, I ran into him a month ago in a conference in Cyprus. And he looked at me and I looked at him and I said, and he says, wait a second. He said, I went to Diyarbakır once. He said, I did a concert. And I said, okay. And he says, there was a young missionary there that helped organize our event. And I says, okay. And he says, I asked that missionary, your friends just got killed. How are you still here? This must be so frightening, so unnerving. And he said, that young missionary said to me, Bill, you don't get it. We've already died. We've died to self. This is what the Bible teaches us, and we're living that out now. And this is why and how we can continue to serve is because we're dead a long time ago, and we live to Christ. Amen. And he said, do you know who that might have been? And I said, I think that was me. Surprised myself almost, But in that moment, in going through that, the Lord steals your character in a different way, prepares you and teaches you things that you didn't know and you could never have learned in a classroom. I remember standing on that cold hill as we were burying our dear brother and just feeling an intense sense of pride, a godly pride. That I could rub shoulders with people like this, that I could be around people that had counted the cost for Jesus. And coupled with that, an intense jealousy. They got a pass home. And they were, safe home. They'd been promoted, as it were, received their crown. And in many ways, the harder bit is not dying that one time, but dying every day and making that a part of your life. And that's the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what he's saying, I think in oppression and opposition, and especially because I recognize that if harm was going to come to us, it most likely would be to him. Men are the ones who are targeted in the Middle East more than the women in terms of, he's the one up front more. He's known. And as a woman who was serving in this context day in and day out, I really learned much what I shared a little bit ago. I learned to surrender to Jesus every day and say, your will be done, not my will, your kingdom come. Because that's why we're there. Like, that is the reason we are there. It is for his kingdom to come. And so if that means that we are going to die or be killed, may it be for his glory and honor. And now, was that easy? No. And still is not when we have continued to face, opposition. But it has shaped me in a way that I have learned every day to say yes to him, yes to his will, and trust that he is going to do what is best for his kingdom, for his glory. And that's what's most important.
I think practically one thing that came out of that for us, looking back all these years, just the honor of being around believers who've counted the cost, and are having to count it day to day. I can leave the country and be safe, when there's a war or persecution. They can't. And that has been not just an honor, but it's been so instructive, character building. And I think I would encourage people to put themselves surround themselves with people that are giving everything for Jesus. It's contagious.
Thank you, Jerry and Sarah. That was very encouraging and motivating. And if you enjoyed this episode, which I'm sure you did, we did.
We did.
And we're quite confident you did. We have a future episode with Jerry and Sarah about their ministry in Northern Cyprus. So stay tuned for yet another episode of To the Ends of the Earth, a CMML podcast.